So welcome everyone to this webinar Wednesday. We are lucky to have with us Marie-Claude Graton. She comes to us from Espace Idée, and she was recommended by a former CVA, a community development agent who used to work in a CLC school and who's now working in one of her partner organizations. Now, Espace Idée it offers several services. It's a social enterprise, entreprise sociale, and they offer services that encourage nonprofits to innovate. So solutions in philanthropy, communications, they have training events, webinars, and many tools, of which today we're going to be talking about communicating impact and the building blocks of trust. Now, Marie-Claude she's energetic, she's creative, she's curious, and she started Espace Idée in 2015. She wanted to collaborate with nonprofits and help them achieve their mission. And I think you will agree with me that she has a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience that she has decided to share with us today. Welcome, Marie-Claude.
Thanks, Catherine. Hi, everybody. Glad to see you here. Thank you so much for joining us. I know these are challenging times for everyone, and we're all having to deal with it. So I really appreciate that you're here. I'm just going to let you know in advance, I just told my husband to go take a very long walk with the dog because I know I don't know if you've seen that Facebook post where the guy's doing the interview on the news and he's got his two kids coming in, and well, that's my scenario working from home right now, but I've got a dog and a cat. So I'm just going to warn you in advance if you hear strange noises. I try to do my best to kind of cover them and take care of that, but you may hear a few things, so it'll just make this funner. So we all need to laugh a little bit at this time. So I don't know if you're like me right now, but I am feeling particularly overwhelmed with the quantity of information that's out there about COVID-19. And I'm trying to stay focused right now on philanthropy and nonprofits and how it's impacting us. And even if I just limit it to that, it's still overwhelming. And I'm finding that there's messages all across the board with what consultants like myself are saying, or I don't know if you're familiar with Imagine Canada or Canada Gives. Everybody's got different opinions about what nonprofits should be doing at this time. So I know it's kind of hard, but we're going to get there. If there's one thing, though, that I know for sure, I mean, we can be asking a lot of questions about, is this a good time to be soliciting? Is this a good time? Obviously all our activities are canceled and so on. But if there's one thing I know for sure, I'm 100% certain about this, is that we can all be doing donor relations. So that means taking care of our stakeholders, our donors, our clients, etc. And that means communicating with them. And this ties in really nicely with what we're going to talk about today. So communicating impact, we can all be doing that. So yes, we may have had to put a stop to some of our solicitations and activities and so on, but we can take this time right now and really work on the communication aspects. And again, that ties into impact. So we're going to get going right away because we've got a lot to cover. So I'm going to start with this picture. You've probably seen this when we talk about impact. It's pretty common to use the picture of the iceberg. So, I guess maybe it's not really original, but I like it because it's so meaningful in that what we're going to talk about here is that a lot of nonprofits are really good about communicating certain things, but that's only the surface. And when we dig deeper, there's so much more that we could be communicating to our stakeholders. And a lot of that deeper information is sometimes the most meaningful. So that's what we're going to look at, is what else, other than the standard things that we're used to communicating, what are the other things that we can communicate in terms of impact to our different stakeholders. So let's start with what we mean exactly when we say communicating impact, okay? So it means sharing information, quantitative and qualitative, about the difference that your organization is making in the community for service users, but also for the issue that you're trying to address. So when it comes to stakeholders, you really want to be focusing on demonstrating the impact of their investments and the difference that they're making, okay? So you want to make your stakeholders the heroes here. So yes, it's important to talk about what we're doing, but it's even more important to talk about what is it that they're allowing you to do through their investment. So here goes the first poll question, okay? So is your organization currently taking any measures to demonstrate impact? Is that the one oh, I think we've got a poll question first. The one I see is who's in the room.
Yeah, so we'll start with that one, and
okay,
then
sounds
as soon as
good.
we have that, we're going to go into the question about the stakeholders. So we're getting some answers in here. So we have CDAs, and that stands for Community Development Agent, and they are the liaison between the school and the community. And we also have some administrators, and these could be principals of a school, people who work at the school board. We call them school board representatives. Okay, so that's the distribution of who we have here today. And now we will go into this question. Is your organization taking measures to demonstrate impact to stakeholders? And of course, we use organization here just to simplify it. It could be your school, it could be your CLC. So it seems to be pretty distributed. We have 7 that say yes, a couple that say no.
Okay. Okay, that's good. So let's see if we can make that so that all of us are doing something to share impact. So there I see. So it's 78% are doing something, 22% said no. So really what I'd like to do today is to be able to give you some tools so that we can all be doing that. And even for those of you who are doing it, maybe I'm able to share some tools with you that you haven't considered before, or maybe that can simplify what you're currently doing. So let's go ahead with, sorry, I'm just gonna, okay, so why is it important to communicate impact? So first of all, let's start externally. So when I say externally, I'm talking about whether this is your donors, this is the public at large, this is your service users, this is anybody outside your organization. So why is it important to communicate impact for these people? Well, you won't have a choice. I understand that for some of you, if you're getting government grants, you have pretty strict reporting requirements that you have to fulfill. So that's one reason. But if some of you are also getting money from foundations, sometimes from businesses or from individuals, they may also have some reporting requirements. So it's important to do, and even if they don't have reporting requirements, it's still important to communicate impact. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more shortly. It's important to demonstrate credibility, accountability, and transparency to your stakeholders. And we see this being more and more important with the newer generations. So I'll give you an example. Let's say, for example, individual donors. There used to be a time when, you know, the baby boomers and the generation before them, when they would just make a donation and it was their annual donation and it was just a given that you were going to receive this and we didn't have to report back. That was just how things were done. It doesn't work that way anymore. With Generation X, Y, Z, we're seeing a lot of studies now that are demonstrating that they expect that we communicate impact back to them. And if we can't do that, we're not going to get them on board. So they have very, very different expectations than the baby boomers or the generation before them. So it's important for that too. We want to demonstrate that resources and funds were used as intended. So of course, so that's important. So if somebody gives us money, we want to tell them, look, we really used the money how we said we were going to use it. We want to create visibility and raise awareness for the cause. So it's not just about for our donors. I mean, this is a great opportunity to, on our Facebook, on our website, to raise awareness about what we're doing. So communicating impact is a good way to do that too. We want to be able to stand out. So we know it. Everybody's being solicited. We're over solicited by everybody. If you can communicate impact, that is a sure way that you will stand out, because I can guarantee you that the majority of nonprofits are not communicating impact, or they're not doing it enough. So if you can find a way to work this into your strategies, I guarantee you that you will stand out among, I should say, all the other nonprofits out there. And it's important to do it to maintain relationships with your stakeholders. So this is good donor relations. So that's externally, okay? But now internally, and some people say, well, why is it important to communicate internally? Well, it's important because you want to communicate. When I say internally, again, I mean it's your staff, it's your volunteers, it's your governors, your board of directors, anybody inside the organization, okay? You want to communicate to them what results were obtained. You want to be able to adjust and improve your services as you go. And when you're measuring impact, this is a good way to do that. You want to be able to highlight your successes. You want to be able to motivate your employees and engage them. And the same thing with your volunteers and your governing board. It's a good way to create a philanthropic culture and to get everybody more involved. And I'll give you an example of this. I've made this mistake several times. I probably should have mentioned at the past, I've been working in the sector for more than 20 years, from small, medium, large-sized organizations. I was in Alberta for 28 years and in Quebec. So I've seen it all, and from many different sectors as well. And I have made the mistake several times that when a good news story comes through our doors, whether it's a new donation, whether it's a testimonial that we receive from a donor or service user, or it could be a board member or somebody who was in the news. What if a newspaper article showed up about our organization? My immediate reaction should have been to share that with my employees, my volunteers, my governing board. And I've often made the mistake of not doing that because we're not used to doing that. We're so busy in our day-to-day and going about our routine that we don't think of doing those little actions that could make a huge difference. I mean, what a great way to communicate to people. Look at the good that we're doing, and this is going to get them fired up and even more motivated. So it's important to do those things to communicate impact internally as well. Okay, so how are you going to identify and demonstrate your impact? So these are a few questions that I want you to ask yourself, okay? So what is the problem, the challenge, the difficulty that we're offering solutions for? What's the difference that you're making in your community? Or another way to look at it is, why do we need you? What are your solutions? What are your services? What are your activities? Be really clear about those. How are you going to achieve your objectives? What are the results of your services? And are you able to demonstrate what that looks like? Do these services bring a change in the community? And if so, what is it? What changes could you make to improve your services, okay? And how would you do that? So, I would like you to consider all of these questions. And really, it's by answering some of these questions that you're going to be able to identify which tools and which methods are most appropriate for you to measure impact, okay? So before I get started, I just want you, a few considerations here. I'm not saying here that I want you to incorporate all of these methods, okay? Obviously, that's not doable. I want you to use the ones that are the most appropriate for your organization. So we're going to go through these, and right off the bat, you're going to say, oh, no, that's not going to work for us. That's not appropriate for us. And that's great. That's exactly the point. Is the idea is to present some ideas and to get you thinking about which ones, if you're not already doing them, what could you incorporate? Because obviously we have to find a balance between our reporting requirements and the need to demonstrate impact and the resources that you have, because we know that it's not like you have one person that's dedicated exclusively to reporting impact. You have to do these with all your other responsibilities as well. So it's important to find that balance. And let's be clear here, we're not conducting scientific studies. the objective is to demonstrate the difference that you're making. So I'm not saying to go out there and get these samples and to, that's not at all what we're saying. I want to keep it simple. All I'm saying is we have to start somewhere. So let's get going. So we're going to start with quantitative data first, okay? So quantitative data, you're more than likely already using this if you're in your annual report and so on. So this is anything that is numerical or statistical data. It's information that can clearly be measured. It usually answers the 5 W's. It's administrative information that, like I said, you probably more than likely already collected for various reports that you already have to submit. And often this is the kind of information that we see in tables, charts, diagrams, that kind of thing, okay? So here are some examples of quantitative data and measures. So I'm not saying that this applies for all of you. These are just examples of the kinds of data that we can measure. So for example, number of service users, your occupation rates, training provided, volunteer hours, the number of participants in your programs, the number of visits, the cost of accommodation, economic benefits, the jobs that you created, dropout rates, death and birth rates, percentage by gender, users by region, recurrence. So these are just examples. Like I said, I know this doesn't apply to all of you, but you certainly have some of these types of data that you can measure, and probably even more. So it's anything that we can associate a number to. So the tools that we would use to measure quantitative data, so don't worry, this is just a snapshot view on this slide. I'm going to go into detail with each one. So first we've got administrative data, okay? So this is the data, like I said, that you already collect for your reporting requirements. We've got questionnaires and surveys, okay? So here, I'm going to show you examples in a bit, but this is a way to use questions that we can then convert into something measurable. Okay, so then we have financial equivalence. So this is when we say things like, well, without donations, our service would cost X amount of dollars to our users, or without our service, with our service is allowing the government to save this amount of money. So it's those kind of equivalents I'm talking about. Then we have return on investment, or a cost benefit analysis. So this is when we measure the expenses versus our revenue to justify the investment. So we're going to look at each one of these, okay? So first of all, administrative data. So again, I'm sure you all have this in your school and community demographics, in your goals and outcomes. You have it in your volunteer hours, in the number of interventions, the programs, the activities that you conduct. You can also demonstrate in the number of partners and service providers that you have. So these are all interesting, this is all interesting data that you can use and that you can communicate to your stakeholders. When we're talking about a questionnaire survey, like I mentioned, we're talking about information that we can convert into numbers and percentages. So this is the type of question that you'll often see, like scales, like rate on a scale of 1 to 5, or when you see, satisfied to not very satisfied. And then what we do is, depending on the number of answers we receive, we can convert that into a percentage, okay? So for example, please evaluate our support group services on the following scale from very satisfied to not at all satisfied. So then you could convert that into 84% of our support group participants are very satisfied with the service. So that's a really, really easy way to get a significant piece of information. So you can imagine the difference. If you report impact to your stakeholders and all you do is show them the questionnaire or the survey, or you just say, we did a questionnaire or survey, that doesn't mean anything. But when you're able to convert that into a percentage or a number and tell them, well, 84% of our participants were very satisfied, that makes a huge, huge difference, okay? Just a reminder, a lot of you probably already know about this, but you can create surveys for free on Google Forms. So if you haven't done that already, it's super, super easy to do as a tool. So I encourage you to go look at it and use that. Next is our financial equivalent. So this is where we want to demonstrate the actual cost of services and to understand the distribution of amounts. So this is when we say, let's say, I'll give you an example, 40% of our services are covered by government grants, 20% are covered by user fees, 20% are covered by donations that we have to seek out in the community, okay? So we can use something like the cost of sending one child to summer camp for 1 week is X amount of dollars. Your donation of however much will allow us to cover the cost of camp and morning and evening transportation for X number of children. So, I'll give you another example. When when you tell a donor or stakeholder, thank you very much, your donation of $10,000 made a huge difference for our organization, that's not enough. Try and convert that. So, and you can. So again, okay, well, thank you for your $10,000 donation. Your investment allowed us to send, 10 kids to summer camp over however many weeks. So give them really concrete examples of what the donation or what the investment was able to do. So it's not just thanking for the donation, the lump sum. You want to go into details, break it down. What did it specifically do? So a return on investment analysis. So this is where you want to look at your revenue versus your expenses to justify the investment. So often we call this a cost benefit analysis. And we see it a lot with fundraising activities. So that's why I'll use this example. So let's say we say something like our annual fundraising activity allows us to raise $50,000. The cost to organize the event is $10,000. So that means we have a revenue expense ratio of 20%, okay? So that means that $40,000, is directly invested in the program, representing X amount of days of summer camp for X amount of children. So again, you can see how when we break it down into very specific data, this is more concrete. So for your stakeholder, your donor, your funder, this is going to really click in, a lot more than just giving them a number and saying, thank you, your $50,000 investment made a huge difference. They want to see what exactly did it do. So this is a great way to demonstrate that. So that's your quantitative data. I went through that. I know I went through that kind of quickly, but I just want to make sure I get through everything. And we're going to spend a little bit more time on the qualitative data because there's a little bit more here. And I think it's qualitative data that we have a tendency to not use or to be afraid of using because we're not too sure how. However, I just want to say that I believe that qualitative data is sometimes even more significant for funders. I get that we have to give numbers, we have to report, that's okay. But when we're talking about funders, and especially when we're looking at foundations or businesses or individual donors, yes, they're interested in the stats, but they're probably even more interested in the qualitative data because it's so much more rich and meaningful. So what it means is this is any kind of descriptive information about people, about events, about behaviors. It's information that we can usually explain with how and why. So it can be observed, okay? It can explain motivations, thoughts, attitudes. And it's information that we can't really measure. So for example, how do you measure things like self-confidence or well-being or happiness? It's a little bit more difficult. It's not as easy as, some of the other examples I gave you. But there are ways that we can demonstrate impact. Okay, so that's what we're going to look at. So first of all, here's a few examples of exactly what is qualitative data, okay? So what are the factors that lead to dropping out of school? What's the impact of divorce on children? How does disease affect the self-confidence of patients? So I know that these don't apply for you, but this is just to give you the examples so that you understand what we're talking about for qualitative data. How did our services contribute to the well-being of children? How were we able to change attitudes, behaviors? How were we able to contribute to the reduction of substance abuse rates in our community? So you get the message. I mean, this isn't stuff that's easy to measure. We have to use other tools, okay? So that's what we're going to look at. So these, again, just talk about, I'm going to go into each one into detail. But first we're going to testimonials or storytelling. Also be with your volunteers, to demonstrate the work that we do, or people in action. We're going to use survey and questionnaires again, just like we did in quantitative methods, except this time we have to make sure it's going to be open-ended questions. It's not going to be yes and no answers. We can also use interviews and focus groups to get opinions, feedback, viewpoints. Can you guys, am I still on? Can you guys hear me okay? Catherine, do you want to just give me a thumbs up?
We
okay.
had a spotty connection.
Yeah, I'm getting a message saying my internet connection is not stable. So if for some reason there's a problem, just sign. The other tool we can use is observation. So observing interactions and behaviors. And the last one, which we don't do very often, is journaling or a diary. So let's go see what each of these is about. So the first one is testimonials or storytelling. So this is really, really popular in, it's been popular in marketing for quite a while. It's gaining more and more popularity in philanthropy. This is such a powerful tool. If you're not doing it already, I highly, if there's one thing that you do, that you come out of today, and if there's one tool that I would like you to use and that everybody can use, this is the one. This is my number one on the list because this is something that everybody can do without exception. So storytelling is, like I said, it's such a powerful tool. You know, we all know this. Like if we share statistics, if we tell people, you know, our mission is whatever, nobody's going to remember that. If we throw statistics out at people, mission statements, you know, nobody's going to remember that. But if we tell them a story about our organization and how it impacted somebody, how it changed their lives, I guarantee you that your stakeholders and funders are going to remember that. So that's why it's so important. So when you're using storytelling, it's really important to use real stories, real situations in your organization to communicate the impact you're having. So I think we've all seen this, you know, before. Sometimes we see it in commercials and, you know, you see, and it says like actual user of such and such, and it's really fake and we know it, and, you know, it's just so obvious. So please use real people. It's really easy to do. We can do it anonymously because I understand there's confidentiality, you know, involved in this, but we can do it anonymously, but use real people. You have to make sure that your stories inspire, motivate, and get people to take action, okay? They have to, that's the only way they're going to get involved and donate. So for your story, this is what I'd like you to ask yourself. How do you change lives through your mission, okay? So when you tell your stories, you have to include emotions, okay? Because that's what's gonna create empathy and get people interested and engaged. Now, I want to be really careful with this. I don't want to abuse this. I don't want to, you know, we can't go overboard with this. And you know, I think it can be a really slippery slope where we use emotions and we're kind of taking advantage of a situation. That is not at all what I'm advocating. But we're all there to, obviously, if our resources exist, it's because we're dealing with challenges. We're addressing a challenge. So, you know, we have to talk about it. And obviously there's emotions behind that. There's people being impacted. There's people that are having certain challenges or struggles. How are we there to address those? And what difference are we making for them? How did we change their lives again? So yes, again, there's a challenge, there's a problem, but we have to always end up, you know, showing the positive side of it, the solutions. Okay, so don't just talk about the problems. Make sure you give people solutions and that it's, you know, it's action driven. So you can use your storytelling not just in written text, but it's in videos. It's such a powerful tool. So I don't know if you've ever tried. It doesn't have to be professionally done. I mean, I think with iPhones today, you know, anybody can do this. We're going to talk a little bit more about this later on, so I won't go into detail right now. I already said the real people, real situations. And again, stay positive and focus on the solutions. So with visuals, this is, again, I really feel strongly about this. You know, I was talking with Catherine about this, you know, not long ago, and I was saying, you know, I see so many nonprofits that, you know, produce their annual report, and it's like this 20, 30, 40-page document of just so text heavy and so, you know, it's so discouraging when you get this. I mean, you know, I'm just putting myself in the shoes of a funder, and I'm saying, you know, like, would I really be interested? You know, do I feel like reading this? And probably not, you know. So there are ways that we can make our tools interesting. Sometimes I get that we have to, you know, send these reports, and I get that they can be heavy, but you can make them more interesting by adding visuals. So whether that's images, drawings, artwork, you know, even such basic things as using color in your titles, etc. They're just little things, but they're going to make it stand out and give people, you know, they're going to feel like reading it and looking at it. You can also use, don't forget that you can use images of service users, again, with permission. We're going to talk more about this. It can be your volunteers, your staff in action. That's always interesting to see too. You can be creative. Like I said, with technology today, you know, there's no limits. So always get permission. So I added this little drawing. I really like it because I just think it's so, you know, it says it all. If you read the bottom there, I mean, imagine a funder getting a picture like this. I mean, who wouldn't love this? This makes such a huge difference. You know, this compared to getting, you know, a report that's so text heavy, filled with stats. You know, this, who would not give again if you know, received something like this? So it makes a huge difference. Again, I just want to emphasize, make sure it's anonymous and make sure you get permissions. So survey questions. So we talked about this in quantitative methods, but now in qualitative methods, the difference is that you're going to use open-ended questions. Okay, so again, that means no yes and no answers here. You want the richness of the answers. Okay, so for example, can you describe your experience during your stay with us? How did the service change your behavior? What changes did you notice after the training? So again, I gave you the free tool, Google Forms. You can use Google Forms, and there's a way that people can go in there and actually type answers. So you can get more than, you know, you can use open-ended questions in Google Forms as well. So don't hesitate to use that. And I just want to, sorry, I'm just going to go back to survey questionnaire. This is a really powerful way to let your funders know that they're important to you. There's no better way to, you know, don't we all feel important? If somebody's asking for our opinion about something, it's because, doesn't it tell us that they value what we have to say? So this is a really important way to let them know that you do care and you're there for them and you're interested in what they have to say. So interviews and focus groups. So obviously when we're doing interviews, it's on an individual basis. When we do focus groups, it's with the group. So this is a great way to get opinions, different viewpoints, to see how people are interpreting things or to get their experiences. The only thing, this is super, super interesting. It's a great way to get really meaningful information. Just keep in mind though that, you know, this takes a little bit longer afterwards because, you know, often you'll have to transcribe or you'll have to do a summary of your findings, and, you know, it's a little bit harder. I'll give you, I used this when I was doing my master's, and I used a lot of qualitative methodology, and this is one that I use, interviews and focus groups. And it was great. This is what gave, you know, so much meaning to my study. But, you know, I admit that, yes, it was long to have to transcribe all of these. So what you can do though is that we're not talking about, you know, 20, 30 people. You know, you can, for interviews, it can even be just a few individuals. If you have a focus group, and you might just have one, but the important thing is to consider this as a tool if it's appropriate for you, because again, you can get some really good data out of this. Observation. So observation, this is a bit of a tricky one. I know it's not applicable for everybody, and this is one that I just want to say we have to be really, really, really careful, because we often use this method when we're talking about subjects or people or things that we can't really, who can't talk, who can't communicate. So for example, you know, very young children, animals, for example, you know, like the SPCA, environmental groups who are studying plants and so on. So, you know, it's tricky because it's very subjective, and we have to make sure that whoever's in a position to do the observation, we have to make sure that these are qualified people. It's not just, we're not just sending whoever to do these observations, and you know, that can be kind of dangerous. So it's may not be appropriate for everybody, but if you have tools in place, if you have the resources, if you have people who are qualified to do this, this can be a possibility. This can be a tool that we can use. And again, when I talk about confidentiality, this applies even more so to a method like this one here. And so the last one that we had is journaling, or having a diary. So this can be useful for if you've got participants in a program for a certain period of time and you ask them to journal starting from the beginning to the end of the program, and you can sort of see progression. The great thing about this is you can use open and closed questions. People can write, people can do, you know, for example, children, you can have drawings, you can have thermometers. I'm going to give you an example about that for feelings, steps that they've taken, tasks that they've performed. So I just gave you a little bit of an example on the bottom there for, you know, you can ask questions like my motivation and my interest in the subject, my participation in the different activities presented, my contribution to group projects. And the idea would be that, let's say if you have group meetings on a weekly basis, participants would hold this diary and put in their entries every week. So I said I'd give you an example. I worked in a palliative care hospice, and we used to, well, they still do, they have support groups for grieving children. And, you know, we know that for children, you know, it's not easy for them to express feelings, and especially when we're talking about death. So one of the tools that they would use is when participants would arrive at their weekly meeting, it was this thermometer on the wall, and it was that they had like different different buttons or different magnets, and each one represented different emotions. And the kids would have to go and put it on the thermometer when they arrived at the meeting to tell the animators how they were feeling. And then they would have to do it again when they left the meeting at the end of the day. So this was a great, great tool because we could see how children felt when they arrived and how they felt when they left. And obviously, in the majority of cases, they felt so much better when they were leaving the meeting because they were able to, through whether it be, activities, art, therapy, whatever tool we were using, it made a difference. They felt good, they felt better. So we had a funder for this program who gave a pretty significant amount of money. And, again, if we had just told this funder, we've got X amount of kids participating in the program and it's making a huge difference. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. It's not as impactful as, showing the difference through this thermometer tool, how kids are really feeling. It's concrete, it's a real example. And for that donor, that made all the difference. And he signed on and continued giving for every year. So, sometimes it doesn't take much. And sometimes we think, oh, what are they really going to be interested in something like that? Well, yeah, they could be. So it's something to consider. So, okay, we've covered everything in terms of quantitative and qualitative methodology. I just want to see out there who's using any of these tools. So you've got, the possibilities are you using some quantitative, some qualitative, a little of both, or none of these?
So we're getting most answers are a little of both.
Okay, excellent. So I don't see the percentages, but oh, there we go. Oh, okay, it's really 100% little both. So excellent. I'm super glad to hear that. So I hope that maybe I've been able to share with you some that you haven't considered in the past, and that you could incorporate. So what I want to do now is, now that I've presented the methods, it's how do you communicate this impact, okay? So here are some things to ask yourself. You're going to want to know whether, does this involve reporting with a specific criteria? For example, we said when you've got specific stakeholders like government grants, for example, we all know that you don't have a choice. You're going to have specific reporting requirements that you have to meet. So for that, I get it. But like I said, sometimes you might have foundations, sometimes you have businesses, sometimes you have individuals, and we can report impact to those people as well. But reporting impact to foundations, businesses, individuals is nowhere near the same thing as communicating impact to government grantors. So you'll see it's obviously, I don't know if you have many foundations and individual donors, but they don't have those same kind of expectations. So, we're not going to send those big fat reports that we send for government grants to our individual donors and foundations and businesses, because that's not what they want to see. Who's your public? So again, like I sort of answered this question already, but make sure you pay attention to, is this going to be for your donors? Is it for your volunteers? Is it for your board members? So depending on who it is, you're not going to communicate your impact the same way, or you're not going to use the same tools. So we're going to talk about that. Are you going to use traditional methods, or can you use different tools that involve newer technologies? So that's important for, I'll give you an example. Let's say some of your stakeholders are people who are 70 years plus. Are you going to start using text messages to, communicate impact? Well, probably not. Some of these people probably still use more traditional methods. So it's important to consider that. If your stakeholders, however, are mainly teenagers, well, you're not going to start, you know, or teenagers' parents or whatever, you're not going to start sharing those big fat reports again with them. You're going to use other tools. So we're going to see what we can do with them as well. Do you have the necessary equipment, tools, and staff? So I know that we're sort of the one-person shop in a lot of cases. We don't have people dedicated just to communicating impacts. So we want to simplify here. So make sure you consider, do you have the programs to do certain things? Do you have the tools and staff in place? So that's important to consider. And how much time do you have? What's your timeline? So again, you know, we don't have, you know, an unlimited time to do this. So let's pick and choose which ones are most appropriate for us. And what's your timeline? Like, is this a donor or is this a funder that's saying, I need to have this like ASAP? Or is this something that you know months ahead of time that you can start preparing for and, you know, put things in place as you go along and send it down the road when it's time to submit your report? So it's important to consider all those things. So these are the tools we're going to look at. So again, I'm going to go into detail for each one. So we're going to talk about infographics. We're going to talk about the annual report, your website, social media, newsletters, letters. And when I say letters, I really do mean like snail mail, emails, and site visits. So I think I've got my last poll question coming up here. So which of these tools is your organization using to communicate impact? Are you using all of them, a few of those, or none of those? So I don't know, how's it looking, Catherine?
It's looking like everyone's saying a few, and we have a request if it's possible to go back one slide, please.
Sure.
All right. So it looks like a few people are
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. I'm glad to hear that. So we're still going to look at each of these in detail here to see if you're doing putting everything in place. So first of all, infographics. So I love, love, love infographics. I think this is such a great tool. Again, this is something else that we're seeing more and more organizations do. So this is the use of visuals to present data. So obviously, this is much more interesting and attention grabbing than, let's say, an annual report. So again, keep in mind, this is a one pager, okay? So what you're trying to do in this one pager is, you're trying to capture everything that you've got in your annual report, or sorry, I take that back. Not everything that you've got, the most important elements of your annual report, and you're trying to capture that in a one pager. So, to choose between the two, what would you rather read, this one pager or this big, thick annual report? Like, I think most of us would choose the one pager, I'm pretty sure. So put yourself in your funder's shoes. Again, I'm going to repeat, you're going to think I sound like a broken record, but I get that if it's a funder, especially for a government grant, you sometimes don't have a choice. You sometimes have to send those big, thick reports, and that's okay. I get it. But if we're talking about funders like foundations, businesses, individuals, this is exactly the type of information you can send them. They're really going to appreciate this because, again, this is so much easier and faster to read, and they're going to feel like reading it. If you send them the annual report, there's a pretty good chance that they're not going to look at it. So the great thing about the infographic is that it can be sent by email too, and you can put it on your social media and on your website. So this is such a great, great tool. I don't know if any of you have heard of there's a free tool that exists. It's called Canva. So they have like templates, and you can go in and plunk in your information. So it makes it super easy. I've also seen the great infographics that Catherine shared with me that you have as templates, and I think they're super, they're so good, and I really encourage you, if you're not already using them, to do so. I mean, you guys are so lucky that you have a template. You don't know how many nonprofits I work with who would just die to have at least a template, and all they have to do is go fill in the information. So if you have that tool and it's at your disposal, please, please, please use it. You know, behind storytelling, this is another one of my number two, I'll say, on my list of takeaways, because it's just so powerful. And so, again, what's great about this tool is that you can incorporate not just statistics, but you can also put testimonials in there. You can put images. And I believe in the one, Catherine, that you shared with me, well, I think you shared two with me, and there was one that was from an actual CLC, and I just thought it was awesome. It was so great because they really incorporated the statistics. There was some testimonials in there. There was a picture. It was a real picture. We could tell of some of their groups. So what a great tool. So, you know, use it. I know it takes time. I know it takes some getting used to. I can guarantee you, once you've done 1, 2, 3 of them and you get the hang of it, these will become so easy for you. And you can start putting it on your website, your social media. You can, even for people who want letters in the mail, you could send this. It's a one-pager. You could put it on the back of your letter or insert it in your envelope. This is a really, really easy tool with huge impacts. So annual reports or activity reports. So, okay, here's how I feel about it. So we have to do them. I get it. We don't have a choice. But on the left side is the typical content that we see in annual reports. So, you know, it's the same old thing, the message from the president, or we have the mission, we have our services, we have activities that we accomplished during the year. We have our collaborations, our partnerships, we have statistics, we have financial statements, a listing of our staff, board of directors, even committees. So that's great. Again, I get that we have to do this stuff, okay, especially for when we're talking about government grants. However, having said that, if we're talking about foundations, businesses, individuals, this is what they want to see, okay? So they want you to demonstrate how donations were used, and they want to see the difference that you're making. So they want you to share with them some impact stories. And you can talk about donors. You can have, and when I say donor, I mean, you could have a profile on one of your donors, somebody who's been with you for a long time, and talk to them and get them to share their story. Like, why did they choose to give to you specifically? Why do they feel that your cause is important? So that can encourage other donors to give. So you can include that type of profile in your annual report. It could be a profile on a staff member, like why is a staff member, why did they choose to work where they work? It could be a service user. It could be one of your volunteers. Why do they choose to give time with your organization? So these impact stories are so meaningful, and they can encourage others to want to do the same thing. So it's important to do them. Don't forget your acknowledgements and your thank you messages. So this is a good place to show them. Often when I see annual reports, I don't see thank you messages. So I'm not necessarily saying that you should include a list of your donors, but at least have a thank you message. Testimonials. So if you get letters, if you get messages, emails from people who, you know, talk about what a great service you're offering, include those. And you can do it anonymously, but it's important to share that information. Again, include photos, images, graphics. I talked about this. So we don't want to have a text-heavy report. We want it to be, you know, images, colorful. Include what you can. We want it to be easy to share electronically. So we know that more and more people are wanting electronic for environmental reasons. I think given the circumstances of today, we're seeing that This is going to change our way of doing things. It's going to be much more technology based from now on. We're not going to have a choice. So make sure that you have to get on board, and you have to make sure that whatever you create, you can share it electronically. And try and do it short and concise. I know that's not always easy, but try and stick to what's really important. And again, those questions that I had on board a few slides ago that was asking, make sure you know who your public is. That's going to help you determine what information to include in there. Okay, your website. So most of you probably already have a website, so that's great. A tool that you could use that's, I love this, is having a section on your website that's dedicated to impact. So I've seen a lot of organizations call this, you could call this section impact in our community, or how we're making a difference, whatever you want. But this would be a section on your website where you could talk about, it's not just about having a donation button, because it's not enough just to have a donation button. Okay, so in this section, you want to talk about things like how people can donate, how they can get involved, whether that's volunteering, whether it's giving their expertise, whether it's in-kind donations. So any kind of way people can get engaged with you. This is also a place where you can share your annual report or any activity reports. You can share testimonials here. You could put in videos, any kind of pictures that you have that are, again, pictures in action, pictures that are meaningful and that tell a story. Social media, links to your social media here. So again, I get that maybe it's not possible for everybody to have this kind of section. If you can, though, I highly, highly suggest it. Social media. So again, I don't know if most of you are on social media. I know that this can be overwhelming. I would say that if you can focus on at least Facebook, I think you should start there. Because with your Facebook, you can direct people back to your website. You can share so many links to anything. I gave, for example, annual report here, but there's so many more links you could share. You could put your testimonials on your social media. Sometimes we don't think of that. But again, if they're anonymous, why not share a good news story? Or if somebody sent you, what a great job you're doing. Well, why not go share that? I think that's great. Thank you messages. So, and when I say thank you messages, be careful, because I think it's getting a little bit old, where we see, the organization with the funder and the big check, that's kind of an older way of doing things. So if you're going to have thank you messages to thank your funders, try and think of a creative way to do that. By getting some of your volunteers or your staff or your service users involved. You could put videos. So we know that on Facebook, especially, videos are viewed so much more than messages. So if you can have short videos, go ahead and do that. Make sure, when I say short, like we're talking short here, don't put 5-minute videos on Facebook. Nobody's going to look at them. So short videos, and you can do these yourself. It doesn't have to be professionally made. Anybody can do this now. Make sure that you regularly talk about the services that you're offering, your programs, what's new. Sometimes we don't think of that. We have it on our website and we just assume, oh, people are going to go, look on our website. Well, no, that's not the case. You have to continually feed your social media. And even if you think, well, I've already done that, well, do it regularly, because, people have short attention spans, or sometimes we have new people following us on our social media. So it's important to keep talking about those things. Make sure you talk about your collaborations, your partnerships. I think that's really important. There's more and more funders out there who are looking at, sometimes they even making a criteria that in order to fund you, they have to see that you're collaborating and establishing partnerships with others. So again, talk about it. If you're doing it, this is a great way to do it on your social media. And you can share media links with stories about your organization. So I gave that example a little bit earlier. Let's say you're in the newspaper, there's a great article about you. Well, again, we don't necessarily have that reaction to go and share it on our social media, but do it. This shows people that, hey, this is, You're out there, you're credible. So don't hesitate to share those things. A newsletter. Sorry, I'm looking at the time, Kathy. I know I'm going kind of fast. I just want to make sure I have enough time for questions. So if I'm going too fast and you want to ask me a question about something that's been covered, don't hesitate to do so. With a newsletter, what you could do, I don't know if most of you are doing newsletters or not. Again, we're seeing more and more organizations do this. If you do it, make sure you add a section in your newsletter where you can profile a partner or volunteer and their reasons why they're involved or donating. You can present a service users and the impact that your program had on her or him in your newsletter. That's always a great thing to include. You can put your testimonials in there, your statistics, your graphics, and of course, don't forget your pictures, your images. So just a little on the side information. If you do have a newsletter, I know with Espace Day we have one and we feel really strongly about this. Your newsletters typically shouldn't have more than 3 or 4 news stories or highlights. So if it's a running list of a whole bunch of services, programs, what you're doing, you're going to lose your audience. It's too much for them to handle. You know, they're not going to read through all that. So make sure you focus on 3 or 4. You know, it doesn't have to be every week. It doesn't even have to be every month. We work with a lot of organizations that have like seasonal newsletters or quarterly newsletters. So, you know, if that's the case, you're really going to have to pick and choose what's the most important and only include that. Worst case scenario, if you have more information that you want to include, but you know, it's too much, put a link and send people to your website instead, and you can put the information there. Letters and emails. So even though, you know, we're talking about all these new technologies, letters and emails still exist. So again, you know, I just want to emphasize it's important to consider the generational differences in your stakeholders. If you're working with an older population, keep in mind that, you know, social media, websites may not be the most appropriate. But if, again, vice versa, if you're working with younger audiences, you know, sending them paper, anything paper may not be the best idea. So again, it's just to really evaluate who your public is. My second point with the letters, I've talked about that. If you do send out letters, anything on paper, you can still send, like I said, the infographic on the back so that you can still talk about impact and make sure that you send statistics, testimonials in that letter. By email, what you can do is, you can't do with any other means, but you can do it with email, is you can send a video. So this is great. So I've actually seen some organizations do this where they'll send their annual report by email, and it's electronic, and then let's say in the annual report they have a testimonial about a service user, and with a picture of the service user. You could click, like it was, you know, you could click, there was a link, you could click on that and it would take you to a video of the service user talking about what a difference the organization made for them. So like, I just thought, wow, like, you know, that was actually, it sounds complicated, but it's really not when you think about it, because all they did was put a link in their annual report so that when people get it electronically, it automatically highlights and they can click on it. So I thought, wow, what a great, great example. Excuse me, I'm just going to have a sip. Okay, site visits. I think this was my last one. Never, ever, ever underestimate the impact of site visits if this is possible. These visits represent a concrete way of showing what you do and the services and donations and action. You can even have open house opportunities if you can. I know this is not possible for everybody. What you could do though is, sometimes we've worked with some organizations, well, some of our clients are women's shelters. So obviously with the women's shelter, they can't have an open house. They can't invite donors to come visit their shelters. So they've done what I think is great. They've done virtual tours. So they did videos and they posted, obviously when the house was empty, and they posted those on their website. Or sometimes it's even as simple as taking pictures of the different rooms in their shelter, just to show people what it looks like. Because again, just another example, when I worked in the palliative care hospice, we always tell people it's one thing to hear about your services, it's something totally different to see what they're actually about. And this totally applies to palliative care. I mean, how many times did we hear people say, oh my goodness, I'm never going to go there because it must be really sad and depressing. And, we would, what I loved doing the most was actually doing visits with my donors and potential donors of the palliative care hospice, because people would realize, okay, this is not at all what I thought. Like, this is so much more. Like, oh, now I really get it. I see what you're doing and the impact that you're having. So this can be true of probably most organizations, I would say. So your stakeholders hear about you, they hear about what you're doing, but until they really see it in action, it can be totally different. So, you can even consider them, if you have activities, if you have certain events, consider inviting them to that so they can see firsthand what you're doing out there. So in conclusion, I went fast. I want to save time for questions. So again, it's important to always communicate impact. So I just want to emphasize that even if this isn't a reporting criteria from, for some of the grants that you're receiving, it's still important to do it. So whether it's foundations, whether it's businesses, whether it's individual donors or potential donors, you can communicate impact. I think I was able to show you some tools that you can do it in simple ways, whether it's just a post on your social media, whether it's adding something to your website. There's very simple things that we can be doing to communicate impact. It doesn't have to be complicated. Again, I want to emphasize, I'm not saying that I want you to incorporate everything here. I want you to choose the tools that are appropriate for you. I just want you to start somewhere. Just even if you pick one and just do it, it's going to make a difference. And don't forget to talk about impact in all your communication. So if you're gathering, if you're collecting this information, we'll use it. If you have it, put it to good use. Don't let it sit there on a shelf. Use it in your social media, your website, annual report, proposals, presentations, anything and everything. You have it, so why not use it? Here's my contact information. I'm gonna answer questions shortly. But feel free at any time, if you have any questions, any thoughts, anything at all, you can send me a quick email, give me a call. That's my office number. I'm working from home right now, but it's been, all the calls are being transferred, and I'm picking up on them on the messages, so don't hesitate if you'd rather call. I'm there to help you guys, so anything that I can help with, by all means, don't hesitate. So Catherine, I think I'm ready for questions.
Wonderful. Okay, so we can stop the share and
sure.
Question. So we have some comments coming in. I know that I've been putting in some key takeaways and questions to the community. So we have a couple of people that say yes, they've invited the donors to come to school. We know that particularly in a lot of the schools they have snacks or cooking, events and opportunities and programs for the children, and they have the donors come in, which is wonderful. I've seen that as well in the school from grocery stores. The directors of the grocery store, I mean, these are their clients as well. They love to see them, and they actually like to get involved. We have Lynn, who tells us that a couple of the community donors have asked for presentations to see how their contribution was utilized. It's a great networking opportunity.
Excellent.
But what are your thoughts on bigger presentations? Do you think that that's something that could be incorporated? Like, are some of these tools things that we can incorporate in presentations?
Absolutely. So you're talking about doing presentations to your stakeholders, right? Is that what?
Well, let's ask Lynn.
Sure. So Lynn, is that what you were referring to? Is presentations about your organization to your stakeholders?
Not only that, I'll just give you one example.
Mhm.
For our Encounters with Canada program, we asked community organizations for donations. And it was started with the 50 Plus Club. They asked if they could have a presentation. They invited myself and the student to lunch. And we ended up spending 2 hours with them. We had a blast. But he presented all the pictures. He told them about what he had, the program he had taken. And then they asked all sorts of questions. It was great. And that's how it started. And we've done a few since then. So
I love that. I love that. And, something else that we could add, I agree with you 100%. I've done presentations to a lot of service type clubs, like the Lions clubs, the like Chevalier Colon. They love, love, love presentations. So they will often invite organizations to meet with their members and, like Lynn said, to talk about your services and what you do. So if you can do that, I encourage you to do it. I think it's a great, great tool.
So do we have any questions? Would anyone like to speak their questions? I know there was some great suggestions. So Stephen, can I get you to reiterate what you mentioned in the chat?
Gee, what did I put in the chat here?
So when you were talking about great idea about the invitations, the token of appreciation.
Yeah, like sometimes we buy promotional items for the school. We give out to the kids, and it might be. I always buy extra, and one idea would be, just to send them with a. It's not that the sponsor would have had to have done something recently, but just to keep them in the loop and remind them, yeah, you are in our mind or our books, or you're on our pages still. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's great. Well, it's a way of thanking them and keeping them connected with you, and so they don't forget about you either. So that's a great way to do it. So why not? Do you use the same tools? Like, do you use them for like sponsorships, for example, or to encourage people to donate or to give to your organization as well? Like sometimes we'll see like, oh, for every donation of, you'll get a pen or you'll get a mug or something like that. Do you use them for that as well?
No, but we should.
Well, no, that's okay, because
good idea. Yeah.
Well, no, because actually, there's like we have to find the balance between when we give out promotional items. There's always a fine line, right? Because yes, we want to say thank you, and we're appreciative of what our stakeholders and our funders are giving us. But sometimes too, some of them see it as, well, are they using some of my money are they spending it on some of these gifts and things that I may not need? So it's always that fine line of measuring, between thanking our donors and making sure that we're appreciative, and also really reassuring them that we're using their money for what was intended. So, but I like your idea of definitely setting these items just so that they don't forget you. I think that's a really, really important thing, to keep in touch with them.
I noticed that our local Maxi, our Maxi actually allows us to sign up and do what's called grocery wrapping. So for 4 days, the students volunteer, they wrap the groceries and get people put in donations. Blah, blah. So I always write them a letter of thanks and include, it's more, so there's 3 photos and the text. And I noticed that it's being posted up in the Maxi for months on end.
That's great. Yeah, for sure. That's a great way to get visibility too.
And one of the things that struck me, and I put it in the chat as well, is, thinking about sharing this information with the internal stakeholders, right? So for the CLC network, the the provincial resource team at Learn often, reminds people or asks like, hey, don't forget to send this to, the governing board or the school board. But thinking about doing a little focus on the volunteers that come in, or the staff members who have, created something with partner organizations, or that have, how has this staff member, whether it's a teacher or support staff or administrator, been able to create something thanks to these donations. Like, what if we can put that behind a school newsletter?
Absolutely. How powerful would that be? The impact, it speaks 1,000 words. So for sure, that's a great way to do it.
Any other questions from our participants? So there was something from Sumin. It was more of a comment, and she said, with the Kitchen Brigades program, so we have a partnership. Learn was able to develop a partnership with La Table des Chefs, and so we were able to help sponsor to bring the Brigade Culinaire, or Kitchen Brigades program, to many of the schools within the CLC network. And they were, Sumin says it's a fantastic opportunity to invite sponsors and stakeholders to the program as judges, because it's a competition, right?
Yes.
We'll invite them as judges to do some taste testing, and involving so a lot of the food gets donated to either food banks or other partner organizations to serve the community in need. And so involving them in that story, because oftentimes we can focus on the students and the effect it's having on the students. What about the effect it's having on the people who are receiving these?
Exactly. Absolutely. I just absolutely love that idea of getting funders involved in the kitchen. I think you could even get them involved in the cooking. They would love that. And, that's something that they're going to remember. And, how hard do you think it would be for them not to give to you again? Of course they're going to give to you again. How could they say no after that? So yeah, go for it.
Okay, and we had another question that came in, and this is it was a written question. It's a big question, so we'll kind of break it down. So the question is, when working on projects with partners, what are the ways we can ensure that the credit is shared with both, like it's shared between both, so the person or the school or the CLC that's created this program and the partner, so as they're sharing to the public and to the funders? And the second part to this is that, is there a risk of over-reporting if multiple partners are reporting the same activity?
Okay, yeah, I think that's yeah.
Sorry, multi-part question. Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's a great question. Okay, this isn't going to be a one-word answer, so there's going to be different layers to this. So yes, I think there can be a danger to over-reporting, especially in the context of where there's multiple partners and collaborators involved. I think if we're all working together on one project, okay, we're all collaborating on the same thing, and then can you imagine if each one of us did a different impact report, and then the funder, the donor, received all of these impact reports? How would you feel if you were that funder? What would go through your mind? If it was me, I would probably think, okay, this is not very efficient. Are they talking to each other? Are they communicating with each other? There's got to be a better way of doing this. So if we're talking about one program, one project, and there's multiple organizations collaborating on this, I highly, highly suggest that for the impact reporting component, that you get together and you do it as a team effort, and that you present one report, but really highlighting what each one of you has contributed to the program or the project. I just think that if we do it separately, it's kind of risky. if for some reason, let's say, each organization is, doing very different programs or very different activities, and each of them can really be easily separated, then of course, there's no problem with sending out separate activity reports from each partner or each collaborator. But again, for example, if you're getting one lump sum of $20,000 and this amount of money is distributed, to 4 different organizations, well, I think it's kind of dangerous to be sending 4 different impact reports to this funder. I think it would be much more interesting if those 4 organizations could really put something together as a team, and submit on behalf. So I don't know if I really answered the question. I hope I answered the question. I don't know if that was detailed enough.
We have a follow-up, and Suman is asking, how would that work if that collaborative activity is actually part of an overall report?
So could you give me an example just to make sure I understand?
Suman, do you want to?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'm just thinking as CLCs, we do so many different activities with different partners and sometimes multiple activities with multiple partners. And we report to stakeholders. So I think it's different. I'm sorry, I'm thinking out loud and maybe finding a solution as I try to describe my question. Maybe if it's to the school board, it's one thing, but if we're doing it to the public, we want to show what we do, but I am also conscious that probably our partners in their annual reports, they're also reporting on it as well. And exactly, it's what you had mentioned, Marie-Claude, is as the general public, how would they view that?
I think if we're talking about, let's say, individual donors, I think that we get into information overload. So I think if they start getting too many reports from too many organizations, we risk losing them. I don't think they're going to pay attention. I see, and this is just my opinion, this doesn't mean that this is the solution, but I see this being more valuable if it's done in the following way. Like if we can get all of the collaborators to go into one report, together, and that's what gets delivered or sent out to the individual donor. And keep in mind, like what I said in the presentation, we don't want to have these 50-page, if it's an individual donor, forget the 50-page reports. We're going to be using other tools. So whether it's the infographic, whether it's, our social media, etc., I think that there's a way to do it without overwhelming our audience, because that's my only fear, is that if everybody starts sending different reports, they're going to get lost.
Yeah, thank you for that. And these are great questions, because in the context of the work that community development agents and the principals of these CLC schools, in the context of that work, it's all about the partnerships. And so that question, obviously, after this whole presentation, is always, it's a natural question to ask, which is, how are you going to be reporting on certain things with your partners, particularly when you may have received funding as part of a collective, either through the table de concertation or another collaborative group, or if you've received funding from the ministry and that gets distributed to many of the schools. So I think
that's a great point. I think, something I didn't say, but I think this is something we should all be doing too, is that, again, if we're talking about individual donors or funders, we're going to keep it simple and not overwhelm them. But if we're talking about, again, for government grants, foundations, businesses, we can ask them too, like, how would you like us to report to you? Do you want us to send separate reports, or would you like us to try and collaborate so that we send you, maybe that's, the best way to go about it is to start with going directly to them. And I think they're going to appreciate the fact that you're looking into this. You're not just going to send them something that they have no interest in whatsoever. You took the time to inform yourself and to see what it is that they want to see, and they're going to pay attention to that.
I love that. So those are some great parting words, I think. If you want to know what kind of report you should send, just ask.
Yeah.
Ask the governing board, what do they want to see? Ask the parents, what is it that they'd want to see? Ask your alumni groups.
And you know what? This goes back to the quantitative and qualitative methods that we had about the surveys. So you could easily, I get that if it's one person, you're not going to send a survey, but that's something else that you could consider. It's there's no better way to meet people's needs than to go directly to the source, right? So.
Yeah, and we have Lynn who adds that our MPI, and MPI stands for Network and Partner Initiative, and that's through the Community Health and Social Services Group, CHSSN. But this is a person that she regularly collaborates with. So she asks her to sit down with her while she's filling out a portion of the report that pertains to the school. So to make sure that the reporting is accurate and up to date. And she says that it's a great opportunity to discuss future projects, activities, funding opportunities. Absolutely. Yes, Lynn, thank you for sharing.
Yes. That's a great example, because, we say this to our organizations too when they're doing solicitations before they send out proposals or funding requests. We say, if you have the chance to talk to the funder and they allow, because not all of them allow you to call them or email them to ask questions, but if you do have that chance and they're open to it, by all means do it. But again, that would apply for impact reporting as well. So communicate with them. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Any last words, Marie-Claude, before we wrap up today's session?
No, I hope that, this wasn't too much information or too little information. I hope that, you're able to take at least one little takeaway from today and put it into action right away. Again, I know that given the circumstances with what's going on, this may not be a priority now, but I hope that once things get a little bit back to normal, that, you'll be able to put some of these into play, and that you'll see some really great results or concrete evidence that what you're doing is so needed and you're making a huge difference.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. I look forward to the next webinar.